Caught my wife cheating on video, so I left. Came back to find her having a mental breakdown and... My name is Ryan, and I'm 34 years old. I've never been the type to overthink or obsess, but that all changed the day I caught my wife, Jessica, cheating. The moment still feels surreal, like I'm stuck in some kind of nightmare I can't wake up from. We've been married for 7 years, and up until now, I thought we had a pretty good life. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but nothing major, nothing that would have hinted at this. It all started a few weeks ago when Jessica began acting distant. She'd disappear for hours without a clear explanation, making up vague excuses about errands or meeting up with friends. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she just needed some space. We both worked full-time, and life had gotten a bit hectic. But something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. One evening, after she came home late again, I decided to check our home security cameras. We installed them a few years ago, mostly as a precaution, since we live in a decent but not entirely crime-free neighborhood. I wasn't expecting to find anything, maybe just her walking in or pulling into the driveway. But as I scrolled through the footage, my heart sank. There she was, Jessica, kissing some guy in our living room. The timestamp showed it was earlier that day, while I was at work. I watched in disbelief as she led him upstairs, our bedroom, the place we shared for so many years. I felt sick to my stomach. My mind raced, and my hands shook as I watched the scene play out on the screen. It was like a car crash. You don't want to look, but you can't turn away. I didn't confront her immediately. I needed time to process it, to wrap my head around what I had just seen. So, I grabbed my keys and left. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get out of there. Driving around aimlessly, my mind was spinning. How could she do this to me? Was I not enough for her? Had she been cheating for a long time? Every question brought another wave of pain. I ended up at a park, sitting in my car for what felt like hours. Part of me wanted to storm back into the house and scream at her, but the other part wanted to never see her again. I was torn between anger, heartbreak, and sheer disbelief. I texted a few close friends, asking for advice, but none of them could say anything that would make this situation any less painful. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to go back home. I don't know why. Maybe I thought she would have left by then, or maybe I wanted to confront her after all. Either way, I drove back, still in a fog of disbelief. When I walked through the door, I wasn't ready for what I found. Jessica was sitting on the floor in the hallway, her back against the wall, staring blankly ahead. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she was clutching her phone in her hands. The second she saw me, she burst into another round of sobs, wailing in a way I had never heard before. It wasn't the sound of someone who just got caught. It was raw, uncontrollable grief. "I'm sorry, Ryan, I'm so sorry," she kept repeating, barely able to speak through her sobs. But I wasn't ready to hear her apologies. "Not yet. Why, Jess? Just tell me why," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my anger fighting against the heartbreak that had taken over. But instead of answering, she just kept sobbing, rocking back and forth as if she couldn't even process the question. I wanted to yell at her, to get some kind of explanation, but something in her breakdown stopped me. She looked like a completely different person, not the confident, put-together woman I had married. "Please, Ryan, don't leave me. Please don't go," she begged between her sobs. It was then that I realized something deeper was going on. This wasn't just guilt, this was something else, something I hadn't seen in her before. I could feel my anger starting to shift into confusion, maybe even pity, but I still couldn't let go of what she had done. She cheated. That was the bottom line. No amount of tears could change that fact. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. I wanted to walk out again, to leave her sitting there in her guilt and sorrow. But part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this than I knew. Before I could decide, she looked up at me with a desperation I had never seen before. "Ryan, please. I'm losing my mind. I don't know what's happening to me. I need help." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just an affair. Something was seriously wrong with her, and as much as I hated her in that moment, I couldn't ignore that she was falling apart right in front of me. Standing there, watching Jessica break down, I felt torn between anger and confusion. The woman I loved, the woman who had just betrayed me in the worst possible way, was sitting in front of me, crumbling. Her sobs echoed through the hallway, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I didn't know what to do, what to feel. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but another part of me was too numb to speak. "Ryan, please." Her voice was a broken whisper now, barely audible through her sobbing. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My body felt like it was made of stone, too heavy to react. What do you want me to say, Jess? I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding cold, even to myself. You cheated. What else is there to say? She flinched at my words, as if I'd physically hit her. For a brief moment, I felt a sick satisfaction from her pain. But then, the guilt hit me just as hard. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the kind of man who took pleasure in someone else's suffering, especially not my wife's, no matter how much she had hurt me. I know I did, she said, choking on her words. I'm so sorry, Ryan. I never meant for it to happen. I don't even know why I did it. She buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that this was some one-time mistake, that she hadn't meant to destroy our marriage. But how could I? How could I trust anything she said after what I had seen? Who is he? I asked, my voice quieter now, but still demanding an answer. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with fear. It doesn't matter. He was just someone. A mistake. I don't even know him that well. Her words only made it worse. How could she cheat on me with someone she barely knew? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I needed answers, something to make this nightmare seem less chaotic. When did it start? I asked, my fists clenched by my sides. Just a few weeks ago. I swear, it was only a couple of times. She was speaking fast now, like she was trying to get the words out before I could stop her. I was feeling lost. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I know it's not an excuse. I know I messed up. But please, Ryan, you have to believe me. It's over. It's been over since before you found out. I don't know what's wrong with me. I stood there, processing everything she was saying, but nothing was adding up. How could she throw away everything we had for a couple of times, with some guy she didn't even know? My anger flared up again, but before I could speak, she started to panic. I'm losing control, Ryan, she sobbed, her voice rising with desperation. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time. I need help. I think I'm losing my mind. Her words sent a chill down my spine. This was more than just guilt. She was unraveling right in front of me, and it was terrifying. As much as I wanted to stay angry, her breakdown was too real, too raw to ignore. What do you mean, losing your mind? I asked cautiously, taking a step closer to her. I don't know what's happening to me, she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I've been having these thoughts. Dark thoughts. And I don't know how to make them stop. I thought maybe if I did something reckless, it would make me feel better, but it only made everything worse. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Jessica was spiraling, and I didn't know what to do. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice softening despite the anger still boiling inside me. I didn't want to burden you, she said, her voice cracking. You've been so busy with work, and I didn't want to add more stress. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I couldn't. Her words felt like a slap in the face. I had been working extra hours to provide for us, to make sure we could live comfortably. And here she was, telling me that while I was busting my ass to keep our life together, she was falling apart, and I didn't even notice. The guilt started creeping in, mixing with my anger, making everything even more confusing. You should have told me, I said, my voice harsher than I intended. I can't fix what I don't know about. I know, she whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. I know I should have, but I didn't know how. And now I've ruined everything. She wasn't wrong. Things were ruined. Our marriage, our trust, everything we'd built over the years, it was all shattered. But what was I supposed to do now? Walk away? Try to fix this mess? I didn't have a clue. Jessica's breakdown continued. She was pacing now, pulling at her hair, her anxiety ramping up to a dangerous level. I can't breathe, Ryan, she gasped, clutching her chest. I feel like I'm suffocating. I don't know what's real anymore. Her words were starting to scare me. This wasn't just a guilty conscience. This was something much deeper. Something dark. I'd never seen her like this before, and it was terrifying to watch. Jess, you need help, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos I felt inside. You need to talk to someone, a therapist, a doctor, someone who can help you figure this out. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I don't know if it'll even help. I feel like I'm already too far gone. Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone who feels like they're losing their grip on reality? And how do you do that while still grappling with your own anger and heartbreak? Before I could say anything else, her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the screen, and her entire body stiffened. Her face went pale, and her hands started shaking even more. "What is it?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly handed me the phone. When I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a message from him, the guy she cheated with. The moment I saw that message on Jessica's phone, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could barely hear anything over the ringing in my ears. I stared at the screen, seeing his name, and something inside me snapped. I didn't want to read it. I didn't need to. Just seeing that it was him was enough. I shoved the phone back toward her, and she flinched like she expected me to hit her. I would never do that. Even in the heat of this mess, the thought of laying a hand on her in anger made me sick. But I was shaking with fury. It felt like everything was collapsing around me, and I was just trying to hold on to whatever fragments of my sanity I had left. "Are you kidding me?" I spat, my voice barely controlled. "He's texting you now? What the hell is going on, Jessica?" She looked terrified. Her eyes were wide, and her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, as if she was scared to even touch it. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I haven't talked to him since it ended. I swear." "Then why the hell is he messaging you?" I demanded, taking a step toward her. I was trying to keep my anger in check, but it was spilling out of me in waves. "What does he want?" Jessica hesitated for a moment, then looked down at the phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She unlocked the screen and opened the message. I could see her eyes scanning the text, and as she read it, her face went pale. "What?" I asked sharply. "What does it say?" She didn't answer at first, just stared at the screen in disbelief. Then, slowly, she handed the phone back to me. I hesitated before taking it, my stomach churning with a mix of dread and fury. When I finally looked at the message, my whole world tilted. "You can't just cut me off like this. You know what we talked about. If you don't respond, I'll show him everything. All of it." My hands clenched around the phone so tightly I thought I might break it. I felt like I was going to be sick. There it was, proof that this wasn't just a one-time thing. This guy was blackmailing her, threatening to show me everything. What the hell was going on? "What the hell does that mean, Jessica?" I asked, my voice barely above a growl. "What is he talking about? Show me everything? What else haven't you told me?" She broke down again, her sobs filling the room. "I don't know," she cried. "I don't know what he means. I ended it weeks ago. I thought it was over. I thought he would just go away." "Well, clearly he's not going away," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "So you better tell me what the hell is going on, because I'm done playing these games." Jessica crumpled to the floor, sobbing into her hands. I wanted to comfort her. Part of me still loved her, despite everything, and seeing her like this was breaking my heart. But another part of me was furious that she had brought this mess into our lives, furious that she had lied to me, and furious that now, this guy had the power to ruin whatever was left of our marriage. "I didn't know what to do," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "It was just supposed to be something reckless. I wasn't thinking. And now he won't leave me alone. He keeps texting, calling. I blocked him, but he finds ways to get through. I don't know what to do, Ryan. I don't know how to fix this." I stared down at her, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to believe her, that she was being harassed by this guy and that she didn't know how to stop it. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me the whole truth. If this was just some fling, why would this guy have anything on her? Why would he be able to blackmail her like this? I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room. "So what? He's just going to keep threatening you until you give him what he wants? What does he even want?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice so broken it barely sounded like her anymore. "I don't know what he wants. I just wanted it to stop." Her words echoed in the room, and suddenly, something clicked. The panic in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, it wasn't just about the affair. She was scared of him. Not just guilty, not just regretful, terrified. I could see it now, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "What did he do to you?" I asked quietly, my anger fading into something darker, something colder. "Jessica, did he hurt you?" She didn't answer right away. Her silence stretched on for what felt like forever. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear her. "I don't know how to explain it. He wasn't like that at first. He was charming, fun. I didn't realize what he was doing until it was too late." "What do you mean too late?" I asked, my heart racing. What did he do? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and fear. It started with small things. He'd pressure me to meet him, even when I said I didn't want to. He'd show up at places I didn't expect. And then he started threatening me, saying he'd tell you everything if I didn't keep seeing him. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair. This was manipulation, control. This guy had gotten into her head, and now he was using it to destroy whatever was left of our lives. And you didn't think to tell me this? I asked, my voice thick with disbelief. You just let this guy control you? Destroy us? I didn't know how to stop it, she cried, her voice desperate. I thought if I just kept him happy, he'd go away. But he never did. He kept pushing, demanding more. And now he's threatening to tell you everything, and I don't know how to make it stop. I stood there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. I was angry at her for letting it get this far, but I was also furious at him, for manipulating her, for using her, for threatening to tear apart everything we had built. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know. Part of me wanted to confront this guy, to make him pay for what he had done. But another part of me knew that this wasn't something I could handle on my own. This was bigger than just me and Jessica. This guy had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. I don't know, I said, my voice rough. But I'm not letting him control us anymore. Jessica looked up at me, her eyes filled with a flicker of hope. You mean you're not leaving? I hesitated. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out and never look back. But I couldn't, not yet. Not with this threat hanging over us. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for what she had done, but right now, we had a bigger problem to deal with. We need to figure this out first, I said, my voice steady. Then we'll talk about what happens next. Her face crumpled, and she nodded, wiping away the tears. Thank you, Ryan. I'm so sorry. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was too much to process, too much hurt to deal with. But one thing was clear. This guy wasn't going to stop until we made him. And I wasn't going to let him win. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Jessica was passed out in the bed after crying herself into exhaustion, but I stayed awake, sitting on the edge of the mattress, staring into the dark. My mind kept racing, replaying everything she had told me, everything that had happened. The betrayal, the manipulation, the threat from this guy. None of it made sense, and I couldn't stop thinking about what my next move should be. I couldn't leave, not yet. Not until I figured out how to handle this. And I couldn't let this guy hold his threat over us anymore. If he had more than just words, if he had proof, pictures, videos, he could ruin not just my marriage but my life. I wasn't ready to give him that power. But confronting him directly? That could make things worse. He seemed like the kind of guy who thrived on control, on keeping Jessica on a leash. I couldn't just walk into a situation without knowing what I was up against. At some point, early in the morning, I heard Jessica stir behind me. She let out a soft groan as she rolled over, her eyes barely open. She looked exhausted, more than just physically. There was an emotional weight on her that I hadn't seen before, and for the first time in a while, I saw her not just as the woman who had betrayed me but as someone who was broken. Someone who needed help. Ryan, she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. Are you okay? Not really, I replied, my voice flat. I've been thinking. She sat up slowly, brushing her hair out of her face. About what? About how we're going to deal with this. I can't just ignore what's happening, Jess. This guy's got something on you, and he's using it to control you and us. She hugged her knees to her chest, looking down at the blankets. I know, she whispered. I just don't know how to fix it. You need to tell me everything, I said, turning to face her. No more half-truths, no more hiding things because you think it'll make me feel better. I need the full story if I'm going to help you. She nodded slowly, tears already welling up in her eyes again. Okay, she whispered, her voice shaky. I'll tell you everything. I waited, my heart pounding as she gathered her thoughts. I had no idea what else she was about to reveal, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know what I was really up against. It started a couple of months ago, she began, her voice barely audible. I was feeling, I don't know, restless? Empty? You were working so much and I felt like we were drifting apart. I know that's not an excuse, but I was just looking for something to fill the void. Her words stung, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. I met him at a work event. He was charming, confident, everything I thought I was missing. At first, it was just flirting. Harmless, I thought, but then he started pushing for more. He'd show up at places I'd be, acting like it was just a coincidence. And when I finally gave in, it felt like a release. Like I was escaping from everything. She paused, wiping at her eyes. I know that sounds horrible. I know I hurt you. But it wasn't about you, Ryan. It was about me. About how lost I felt. Lost? I repeated, my voice thick with anger and hurt. So you thought sleeping with some random guy would fix that? I don't know what I thought, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. I wasn't thinking. I was just reacting. And now it's all blown up in my face. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. And what about the blackmail? When did that start? She looked away, shame written all over her face. After the first time we slept together. He told me he had taken pictures. That if I didn't keep seeing him, he'd send them to you. I clenched my fists, my blood boiling. Pictures? He took pictures of you? She nodded, her face pale. I didn't know at first. He didn't tell me until afterward. But once I knew, I was trapped. I didn't want you to find out, so I kept seeing him. I thought if I just played along, he'd eventually get bored and move on. But he didn't. He kept pushing, kept demanding more. And now he's threatening to show you everything. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. I paced the room, my mind spinning. This wasn't just an affair. This was manipulation, coercion. Jessica had been caught in a trap, and now we were both paying the price. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked, my voice thick with frustration. This is blackmail. He's been using you, Jess. You could have stopped this. I was scared, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want you to know. And what if the police didn't believe me? What if he made everything worse? Her fear was palpable, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I started to understand. She had been manipulated, coerced into a situation she didn't know how to escape from. But that didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. I can't believe this, I muttered, rubbing a hand over my face. This guy has been controlling you for months, and you just let it happen. I didn't know what else to do, she cried, her voice breaking. I know I should have told you. I know I should have gone to the police. But I was too scared, too ashamed. And now I've lost everything. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I wanted to be angry, wanted to yell at her for being so reckless, so blind. But I couldn't. Not entirely. Because I could see now that she was a victim, too, caught in the web of someone else's control. And as much as I hated what she had done, I couldn't ignore the fact that she had been manipulated, just like me. What does he want now? I asked, my voice quieter, more measured. I don't know, she admitted, her voice shaking. He keeps texting, keeps calling. He says if I don't respond, he'll show you everything. But I don't know what else he wants. I thought about it for a moment, trying to figure out what our next move should be. We couldn't keep living like this, with this guy hanging over our heads, threatening to destroy everything. We needed to take control of the situation, somehow. We can't let him keep doing this, I said firmly. You're right, he's not going to stop. So we need to take matters into our own hands. Jessica looked up at me, fear and confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean we're going to confront him, I said, my voice steady. Together. No more hiding, no more letting him control you. We're going to end this. Her eyes widened in panic. Ryan, you don't know him. He's dangerous. I don't want you getting involved. I'm already involved, I said sharply. He's threatening our marriage, our lives. And I'm not going to sit by and let him keep doing it. But what if he? I don't care what he does, I interrupted, my voice hard. I'm done letting him scare us. We're going to face him and we're going to end this. Jessica looked terrified, but I could see a flicker of hope in her eyes. She nodded slowly, wiping away the tears that had been streaming down her face. Okay, she whispered, but we'll do it. Together. I didn't know what was going to happen when we confronted him. I didn't know if it would make things better or worse. But one thing was clear, we couldn't keep living like this. And I wasn't going to let this guy win. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how we were going to confront him. Jessica was a wreck, barely holding it together. I couldn't blame her, though. The thought of facing the guy who had manipulated and blackmailed her was terrifying. But I couldn't let her face him alone. I had to be there, not just to protect her but to show her that she wasn't fighting this battle by herself anymore. I decided we would meet him in a public place, somewhere neutral, somewhere he couldn't pull anything too crazy. There was a diner just outside of town that I figured would be a good spot. It was usually quiet, but not so empty that we'd be isolated. I texted him from Jessica's phone, keeping the message short and to the point. We need to talk. Meet me at the Sunspot Diner, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone. It didn't take long for him to respond. Just seeing his message pop up on her phone made my blood boil. Fine. But this ends on my terms, not yours. I didn't tell Jessica what he had written. She was already anxious enough, and I didn't want to scare her even more. Instead, I just told her we had a plan. She didn't ask for details, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was terrified of what might happen. The next day, I could barely focus at work. My mind kept running over every possible scenario, every way this meeting could go wrong. By the time the clock hit 5 p.m., my nerves were shot, but I had made up my mind. This was happening. We couldn't keep living in fear, letting this guy control our lives. Jessica and I drove to the diner in silence. The tension between us was thick, but it wasn't just because of what was coming. We still hadn't resolved anything between us. Our marriage was in ruins, and even if we got through this, I wasn't sure how we could ever rebuild what was broken. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, we had to focus on getting rid of him. We arrived at the diner a little before 7, and I parked the car in the lot across the street, where we could keep an eye on the entrance. I didn't want to go inside until I knew for sure that he was alone. Jessica kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "What if he doesn't come alone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we leave," I replied. "I'm not taking any chances." She nodded, biting her lip as she stared out the window. I could tell she was on edge, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. I reached over and squeezed her hand, more to reassure myself than her. "We've got this," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. At exactly 7 p.m., I saw a car pull into the diner's lot. It was him. I didn't even need to see his face to know. It was the way he carried himself, that cocky, self-assured swagger. He parked and got out, scanning the area as if he was expecting trouble. I watched him for a moment, my hands clenched into fists. "He's alone," I said, exhaling slowly. "Let's go." Jessica swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached for the door handle. I could tell she was terrified, but she nodded. "But let's do this." We walked into the diner together, the bell above the door jingling softly as we stepped inside. The place was almost empty, just a couple of old-timers sitting at the counter, sipping coffee. The guy was sitting at a booth in the back, his back to the wall so he could see everything in front of him. Typical. He saw us immediately and smirked, leaning back in the booth with his arms spread out on the seat like he owned the place. That smirk, that was what set me off. It was the same smug look he'd had in the video, the one that had haunted me ever since I caught him with my wife. Every muscle in my body tensed as I resisted the urge to knock that smirk off his face. Jessica was frozen beside me, her face pale as she stared at him. I gently nudged her forward, and we approached the booth together. He didn't bother standing up. He just watched us with that same smug expression, as if this whole thing was some kind of game to him. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Look who decided to show up. The happy couple." I sat down across from him, keeping my expression as neutral as possible. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing how much he was getting to me. Jessica slid into the booth beside me, her hands clenched in her lap. "You wanted to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. "So talk." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Straight to the point, huh? I like that." He leaned forward, his smirk widening. "But let's be real here, this isn't about talking. You're here because you know I've got something that could ruin your perfect little life. And you want to know what it'll take for me to keep it to myself." I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my cool. "What do you want?" He tilted his head, pretending to think it over. Let's see. What do I want? I could ask for money, but that's too easy. No, I think I want something else." My fists clenched under the table. "Like what?" He leaned back, his eyes flicking to Jessica. "I want her." "One more time." Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I felt a surge of white-hot rage pulse through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I let him get under my skin, I'd lose control. And that's exactly what he wanted. "You're out of your mind," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He shrugged, unfazed by my anger. "Maybe, but it's up to you. Let me have one more night with her, and I'll disappear. You'll never hear from me again. Or, you can refuse, and I'll make sure everyone sees what we did. All of it." I could feel Jessica trembling beside me, her breathing shallow and panicked. I reached over and grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly. I wasn't going to let this happen. I wasn't going to let him control us any longer. "No," I said firmly. "That's not going to happen." His smirk faltered for a second, but then it was back, even wider than before. "Suit yourself," he said, standing up and pulling his phone from his pocket. Guess I'll just have to send these out, then. Before I could react, Jessica shot up from the booth. Her eyes were blazing with anger, her fear completely gone. Enough, she shouted, her voice echoing through the diner. He stopped, surprised by the sudden outburst. I'm not scared of you anymore, she said, her voice steady and strong. You've manipulated me, controlled me, but I'm done being your victim. You want to show Ryan? Fine, do it. He already knows everything. I'm not going to let you hold this over me anymore. He blinked, caught off guard. Jessica? No, she snapped, cutting him off. I made a mistake and I've paid for it. But I'm not going to let you keep using me. This is over. You're done. He stood there, speechless for a moment. I could see the shock in his eyes. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her to stand up to him. He had relied on her fear, her guilt, to keep her under his control. But now, that control was slipping away. You think I'm bluffing? He sneered, holding up his phone. I've got proof, Jess. I can ruin you. Jessica didn't flinch. Do it, she said quietly. Ruin me. But you'll never control me again. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her in disbelief. Then, slowly, his smirk faded. He knew he had lost. Without the fear, without the power he had over her, he had nothing. He cursed under his breath and shoved his phone back into his pocket. You'll regret this, he muttered, turning on his heel and storming out of the diner. As soon as he was gone, Jessica collapsed into the booth, her whole body shaking. I sat down beside her, wrapping my arms around her as she sobbed into my chest. We had done it. We had faced him, and we had won. But the weight of everything that had happened still hung over us, heavy and suffocating. I'm sorry, she whispered through her tears. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved that it was finally over, but another part of me still felt broken, betrayed. We had survived this, but our marriage, that was another story. I know, I said quietly, holding her close. I know. We sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, not saying anything. There was still so much to figure out, so much pain to work through. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like we might have a chance. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. If you like such stories, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. It will be the biggest support for me.